Harvesting Infinity is about our infinite capacity to create and innovate. This show originates from my books, blogs, columns, talks, and experiences. All are about innovation, innovators, innovation relationships, and innovation conditions. My name is Howard Lieberman, and you can learn more about my life as an involuntary innovator at howardl.com. The April episode of Harvesting Infinity has two guests. The Meaning Place segment is a conversation with Jim Lawrence, a creative outlier who has been a professional actor, pilot, author, photographer, and member of the Creator's Flywheel. In the Composer's Corner, we have a conversation with Robert O'Connor, an upcoming composer I met at Juilliard, who's also a musician, engineer, painter, filmmaker, and one of the founders of ICOCO, the International Interactive Composers Collaborative. So to dig a little deeper and explore this ability to harvest infinity, which is our innovation superpower, I want to talk about a few different things. The first thing is, what is an innovator anyway? An innovator is someone whose insights have been adopted. If you don't have insights, you're not innovating, and if nobody adopts any of your ideas or watches any of your movies or listens to any of your pieces of music, you're not an innovator. So the population that these innovators come from are called creative outliers. These are the people who never stop creating, even though society told them not to. And why did they not stop creating? Well, they got a lot of meaning out of it. They feel good creating, so they don't stop creating. They're not doing it because somebody told them to or because they're paid. They are creating because it makes them feel good. And why does this matter? Because if you don't create meaning by what you're doing, you're never going to put in the amount of effort that it takes to be an innovator. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. And if you don't notice the time is going by because you're deriving meaning from doing it, well, then you're much more likely to get there. And you have to support this unusual amount of time and effort. Now, Meaning Place is a different concept than the meeting place where people go and hang out and meet and network, and then the marketplace where people go and buy and sell things. Meaning Place is internal. Meeting and marketplace are external. Meaning Place is about your relationship with the universe. You do it because you want to. It makes you feel good. And why does it make you feel good? Because it supports your identity. It supports who you think you are, and you get into a state of flow, and then you don't notice that time is going by. So you could spend a lot of effort. And since this is a kind of thing to do that is sustaining and renewing, you don't run out of energy because you feel good doing it. And since it's not about achieving goals, it's a goalless activity. It's more about mastery. It's more about a behavior. And for me, making music is one of my favorite meaning places. So I'm going to make some music. And since I play to a lot of musicians, and a lot of them have low self-esteem because they don't think their music's good enough, this is a message for all of you musicians out there. Now, get started. Now, get moving. Not sure where to start. Not sure what to do right now. Now, get started. Now, get moving. Find out what to do. Find out where to start right now. Change is needed. Change right now. Find out what to do. Find out where to start right now. Find out what to do. Find out where to start. Open up your heart. Finally, it's time to do it. Now get started. So, if you're a musician and you're waiting to get good enough, don't wait. Just start. As you can see, you don't have to play perfectly to go out and play. But I want to talk about this bass a little bit because musicians are nerds. You know, there are sports nerds, there are music nerds, there are art nerds. Nerds are people who spend disproportionate amounts of time doing the same thing where everybody else in your life wonders, what on earth are you doing spending all of that time doing this stuff? So I want to talk to you bass nerds for a second. So apart from the stand-up bass, like big acoustic bass, which is really kind of a drag because you need a station wagon. It's too big to have a car. So that's why the electric bass kind of won over the last 50 years. This is an acoustic bass guitar. So it's a guitar, but it's a bass guitar. So it's got 4 strings like a bass. And unlike the acoustic bass, which is really giant, and unlike a normal electric bass, which has a 34-inch scale, this has like a 29-inch scale. So it's a short bass. In fact, it's called a short scale bass. So if you're a guitarist, short scale basses are easier to play than basses because the neck is similar in length to a guitar. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, basses have a lot of different kinds of strings, and some of them really hurt your fingers more than others. And these are nylon, black nylon tape-wound strings, which I don't think that camera has a close-up, but this one might. So these are strings that are black, that's the first thing. And they're wound with black nylon tape. They have a metal core, and that's why they sound a little more acoustic-y. But another fringe benefit is they don't hurt your fingers as much when you slide around because they're wound with tape. And yet another advantage is it takes less pressure to push them down. There's less tension. So the combination of a short scale bass, nylon tape wound strings, and the biggest surprise of all, this is like a $100 instrument, which is surprising because most basses cost a lot more than that. The combination of these things mean if you wanted to be a bass player and get into bass playing, for $100 or $200, you could dive in and start playing. And you can get meaning, especially if you like rhythm and you really like bass. And you have to be willing to invest those diminishing returns of energy because you can't get good with no time. It takes some time. And if you're getting meaning out of it, then you don't notice how much time is going by. So you could noodle around, play with YouTube, play with your friends, play by yourself, and you too can become a musician and create a meaning place. This is an example of meaning place. Sports nerds get meaning by getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, getting into the swimming pool at 5 o'clock and swimming laps for an hour. Musicians don't do that. They stay up until 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they get up late. But if you want to be an innovator, you're going to have to first get meaning. It's on the critical path. And you have to come from that population of nut jobs I call creative outliers, those who are willing to spend ridiculous amounts of time on things that don't matter to hardly anybody else. That's what this show is about, Meaning Place. And we have two guests that will be coming up that are both exemplars of this. And they're not here yet, but I'll tell you a little bit about them. One of them is a pilot, photographer, author, writer, and the other one is a composer, painter, engineer, videographer. So we're in the Meaning Place segment, and my guest is Jim Lawrence, who I've only known for a few months, which means I'm going to find out some things today that I didn't know either. But he has a very, very interesting background. He's an example of a creative outlier. He's a pilot, he's an author, he's a photographer, he's been an actor. He even knows a lot of famous people too. So where we should start, I'm going to start with, you told me you had two really great loves. And one of them was flying, and another one was connection. You like connecting with people. So what do you have to say about that?
Wow. My dad was a pilot in World War II. Flew B-17s in the max effort raids over Germany. Thanks for inviting me, by the way. This is fun.
Thanks, Jim, for coming.
Oh, you bet. And I didn't grow up with him. My mom divorced him when I was 3, and we left. I never saw him again until I was 17. And when I contacted him, I sent him a letter and said, I'm going to the Air Force Academy. And he sent me a ticket and said, come back, because I had no contact with him at all. My mom had a lot to do with that. And we got to be friends, and I got to he was building model airplanes in his basement, just as I had all my life, without any stimulus from him. And I decided that I wanted to be an astronaut. That's why I went to the academy. And so I lasted 2 years and said, okay, flying, yes, but Air Force, no. Military, no. So I resigned, went back home to Long Beach and to be a writer. That's what I wanted to be. And I tried out for a play instead, just for the hell of it, at Long Beach State, and got the part, and boom, I did like 13 plays at State in the next year and a half. That's how I started, as acting. And flying, I think you're asking about flying, right? Okay, so I wanted to fly, but my mom didn't want me to fly in light aircraft, so I had to put that away. But 1972, I read something about a hang glider, 71. So I was living in Oregon building geodesic domes with friends and running an Arabian restaurant in Ken Kesey's old hometown in Springfield, Oregon. And we tried to fly the thing. Unfortunately, we couldn't because it weighed 100 pounds. It's built with electrical conduit and plastic sheeting. But that kindled my love, and I bought a hang glider the next year and learned to fly it on the dunes of Oregon, and that changed my whole life.
And you bought another hang glider last week or last year?
Last August, because the hang gliding led me into writing stories and taking photographs for aviation magazines, ultralight aircraft magazines, because ultralight was becoming a really big thing. And
why was that? Did you need less qualifications to fly an ultralight than a plane?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And they struggle with they've messed around with the laws a lot. The FAA has gone in and out, but ultralight aircraft were a way for a guy, basically an ultralight started out as a hang glider with an engine on it, little 10 horsepower Mac 101 or something. And the one I had was a flying wing hang glider with an undercarriage and wheels and a 40 horsepower engine, pusher engine behind my back, and a 5-gallon can of gas under my seat, which I tried not to think about if I had a hard landing, what would happen. I had a lot of great flights in that aircraft. And I became an editor and writer for an ultralight magazine from that. And, you know, I just kind of fell from one thing into another. I was kind of a creative outlier with some creative luck. I got to do a lot of things that I really got very excited about.
And you were opportunistic, so I bet you didn't spend a whole lot of time making these decisions as you moved from one world to another world to another world. Did you just like go for it?
Yeah, that's a polite way of saying recklessly impulsive. Yeah, I would get a wild hair to do something, and I would just dive into it with ultimate fanaticism. It's not the right word, but that was all I could think about. I would think about how in love I was with what had discovered, and that I was the luckiest guy in the world.
So you probably flew a bunch of different kinds of crafts, but you also took pictures of even more because you wrote for Flying Magazine for like 30 years.
Yeah, it was Plane and Pilot. Yeah, I didn't work
Plane
for
and
Flying
Pilot.
Magazine. Plane and Pilot, which was like the runner-up, the wannabe Flying Magazine. It was a more personal, more populist kind of magazine, and very successful for 40, 50 years until they finally sold it to somebody. So I worked for the publisher who did that, and Outdoor Photographer and PC Photo and a lot of other magazines, and I got to work on all of them and do all kinds of different stories and articles and do photography for Plane and Pilot, home-built aircraft, ultralight aircraft. So I got to fly and then photograph and then write about all kinds of different aircraft, from hang gliders and ultralights up to twin-engine light planes and so on.
And because you were writing and flying and photographing, you went through the whole digital revolution of photography. You started with analog and went to digital, so you went through the whole thing.
I did, yeah, that was fun.
When did you get your first digital camera?
Boy, I started shooting with a Nikon S3 or something, I think, which was all slide film. And then Canon talked me into shooting for them, shooting with their equipment, because they knew I'd give them a plug, which I did. I made great equipment. So yeah, Canon, so that was probably about late 80s, early 90s, when these digital cameras started coming out with very low resolution. But what facility and what freedom it gave. It was so much fun. I could process at home. I heard about this program called Photoshop, so once I could afford it, I got it on my computer and processed all my own photos once I had them scanned. Yeah.
Did you ever try taking the lenses from your single lens reflexes and put them on digital cameras?
Don't think no, they didn't fit.
Because I think Nikon made an adapter.
Oh, yeah.
So you could take your Nikon lenses and put them on the new Nikon electronic cameras.
Yeah.
So
I probably thought about that or read about it, but never did. I just got all new equipment.
So,
every year I got new equipment.
So what gives you a bigger kick, the flying or the photography or the writing? You did a lot of everything.
You know, it was so immersive. That's the word I was looking for before. I was kind of a lazy creator. You know, when I didn't have a job, I'd just kind of kick back and maybe not do anything, go see movies or eat Oreos and milk and watch TV for a day or two. And then I'd go off on a shoot and work my butt off. And there wasn't one thing that I loved to do more. The photography, you know, hanging out of the back of an airplane, Cherokee 6, we used to fly, was my main photo shoot. And I had a really great formation pilot. This is for Plane and Pilot mostly. I did about 500 or 600 covers for Plane and Pilot in my career, in that phase of my career. And I just love being in the air. And I love the uniqueness of shooting out of an airplane with the door off the airplane, the back of the airplane, belted in, sitting down on the back, folded forward seat of the second seat so that I wouldn't fall out. which is an important consideration. And
So how did you end up taking pictures of photographers? Since you were a professional photographer, but then you ended up making coffee table books of famous photographers.
of famous photographers, famous landscape and nature photographers. Yeah, that was for Outdoor Photographer magazine. I had left that magazine and went freelance plane pilot for about 3 years. And then they started Outdoor Photographer, and they called me and said, look, would you come back and be managing editor? And I said, sure. So really, managing editor, I didn't know a thing about managing editing or managing. I'd done editing before. But I wrote tons of stuff for every issue, product reports and profiles. And one of the things they wanted for every issue was a profile of a famous photographer like David Munch or Tui DeRoy. Gosh, some of the others now, the names are escaping me. But I probably did 100 full feature things. I didn't take pictures of them. We used their pictures in the magazine. But the writer side of my personality really came out in that period. So I got to not only write about people, I got to really talk with them just like you're talking with me and find out what they were like underneath the technical stuff.
So because you were also a photographer, you could probably have different kinds of conversations with them than people who were not.
Well, I did, and that's a great question. The interesting thing was that every photographer I interviewed, to varying degrees, all they wanted to talk about was the spiritual aspect of what they experienced when they went out in nature to do their work. The magazine wanted me to have technical. You know, when I do this setting, then I get a great picture. And the photographers, of course, know that the technique is the very first thing. It's like the building block. And then you go out and you listen to where you're at, and that inspires the photography. And they all said the same thing pretty much. They felt in the presence of spiritual presence when they were out in nature shooting. And I was amazed by that. So we would get through the technical stuff as quick as possible because they didn't want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about what moved them to shoot the kind of photos that they did. And there were some amazing stories people told me and the experiences that they had. I loved that time. I did that for several years with Outdoor Photographer, and then I moved on.
So that was one of your other great loves, was connecting. And you connected with a lot of communities. You connected with the photographers, you connected with the pilots, you connected with the photography companies. So tell us about how you got from being an actor into a stage actor into television and what this had to do with photography.
Yeah, right. That's going back to, I left the theater in 1971. South Coast. I'd done 19 plays there and I was exhausted. I was working a job in a liquor store with a couple of abusive ex-sea captains who liked to push me around, and I had a bit of a resistance to that, so I didn't last there too long. Then I worked for a college, you know, to support that habit. But when I left the theater, I worked up in LA for 1.5 years with my ex-wife, and then we moved to Oregon, and that's what I was talking about earlier, that period, building domes and so on and so forth, and just living kind of a semi-hippie life and serving Arabian food every night. And I was playing a mandolin. I learned enough that I could pick out sort of a tune with a mandolin for the belly dancer, who was one of the wives. There were three families living together. That was a lot of fun.
You said you did some publicity photos, though, for the theater group.
Well, I did when I was in the theater, that's true, yeah. I started out with Ken Shearer, who was married to Tony Shearer, who became Tony and Tennille music group. I might have told you about that. He was the photographer for the theater, and he had lots of other things to do. He asked me if I'd take it over, and I said, okay. So he taught me darkroom equipment, like you know about. And so I printed the lobby photos and publicity photos for the theater for a couple of years. But then I quit there and I went up to Oregon, and then I got the itch to act again. And I tried out for a play in Eugene, which is where we live, called, what was the name of that? Lawrence Olivier and Michael Caine were in it. It was a 2-person play. Mm-hmm. And Sleuth.
Sleuth.
So I got the part of the Michael Caine part. And I was all excited, and I was rehearsing that, and my sister, who had married Dean Martin at the time, the singer, performer, the wonderful talent that he was, she invited me down to visit her in California, so I went down. I had dinner with her and Dean and Aaron Spelling and his wife, and they had put in a word in Aaron's ear, I think, and he said, "So Jimmy, I understand you used to be an actor. You're back in acting or something now." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I've got a series called The Rookies. Would you like to be on it?" I said, "Seriously?" "Yeah, sure, I'd love to be on it." So they did a 2-hour special movie of the week. And Leslie Nielsen was the bad guy in it. He was terrific. What a great guy. And they gave me a part as a SWAT cop, jumping over fences. You know, they wore me out the first day on purpose, kind of a gag. They had me jump over a fence 8 times. The director said, "Hey, nobody said it was going to be easy," because they resented the fact, I think, that the producer of the show had said, "Look, use this guy here. This guy with a curly blonde hair." My hair was out to here. But I did a good job in the thing, and ABC saw clips from the show and said, "You know, why don't you do a series, call it SWAT, get that blonde kid, get Steve Forrest, who was also in the show, and 3 other guys, call it a SWAT team, we'll run it in as a mid-season replacement," in 1975. So a week into my first ever acting job on TV or on film, I get a series, which just doesn't happen to most people, I think. And so I did the series, and that's how I became a TV actor. And it was died a premature death.
So how'd you meet Spielberg?
Spielberg, boy, I'm hopping around here. I feel like a bug on a griddle. I did a play at Long Beach State called The Queen and the Rebels by Ugo Betti. I'm sure you've heard of it. Nobody's heard of it. It's one of these classical, you know, academic type plays. And I wore a long trench coat, a brown trench coat, down to my shoes, and a hat. I was 20, how old was I? I was 19 years old. And I was supposed to play a 50-year-old engineer. He didn't even have a name. He was just called the engineer. So I'm puffing myself up and talking, you know, like I imagined a 40 or 50-year-old man would talk. It was really, really terrible in the show. No question about it. But one day I was outside the theater and Spielberg walks up. He says, "Hi, my name's Steve Spielberg. Nice to meet you. I saw you in The Queen and the Rebels, and you were brilliant." And I thought, what's the matter with this guy? Who is this guy? I was anything but brilliant. Even my playwright professor at school had said, he went around and several people in the class were in the show. And when he got to me, he said, "So, Jim, the one thing I couldn't quite figure out what you were doing on stage," which was a really nice way of saying, "You really sucked." So for Steve Spielberg to stand there, who wasn't Steve Spielberg then, Steven, made me doubt his credibility. But he said, "I'm doing a film. We're shooting every weekend. It's a bicycle racing film. I'm calling it Slipstream. I think you'd be great in the lead part of the thing there." I said, "Okay, sure." He said, "I can't pay you anything." I said, "Pay you?" I wasn't thinking about payment. It'd be fun to be on film. "I'll give you a cut of the film when it's done." I said, "Great, deal." So for months, we went out shooting bicycle racing stuff. Boy, I mean, what a great guy he is and was. So much energy, so much enthusiasm, but a razor, kind of a laser focus on what he was doing. And I was so impressed by that. And, you know, he was a good person. He wasn't pushy. He wasn't trying to show he had a big ego or anything like that. I think he's exactly the way he appears today to be, just a real human being. Great guy. I miss him. I loved him. I was so happy to do that work with him.
And you met another famous Steve as well.
Steve, yeah, it was my year for Steve's. I did, the professor at Long Beach State wrote a play called The Prince and the Pirates. And I was the head of the pirates, Malboca, you know. Malboca, Prince, I mean, head, yeah, whatever. The head of the pirates. And one of the guys in the crew was this kind of quiet, shy, retiring guy named Steve Martin, who had a whole background that I didn't know anything about. And one day somebody said, "Hey, we're going down to see Steve perform at a local coffee house down in Seal Beach." So 4 or 5 of us from the cast went down there. And Steve comes out and he sits on a stool. And this is a guy I had not seen in the play at all. In the play, it was like, I didn't even hardly know he was there. He was so quiet and internal. Here he starts out reading, he does a couple of magic tricks, and then he starts playing banjo. He had a banjo strapped around his neck. Absolutely world-class, prize-winning banjo player, which I didn't know either. Then he recites Carl Sandburg's Chicago, hog butcher of the world, blah, blah, blah. Here's this dramatic voice. I thought, who is this guy? He's like Batman, you know, he was in the play, and he's not at all like that, like I thought he was. And he did some more magic tricks, and it was an amazing, amazing performance. I thought, man, this guy, he's been hiding out. What a treat to see him go the way he went and become probably the most successful stand-up comic in history. I watched his biography the other day. Have you seen that on TV? Yeah. With Martin Short. He's now doing these things with Martin Short. And he's more like the guy I remember from school in person than he was his persona, his public persona. So that was fun.
So just to come back to this meaning place concept, all these things had meaning, and I think you have a number of attributes that people who create meaning for themselves are. You clearly were rebellious. You were not a follower.
Not a follower.
For sure.
No.
And you were opportunistic, so you sort of dove on things when they got you excited. But you once told me that you were a chatty introvert. So how does that work?
Boy, yeah.
How could an introvert be chatty?
You know, not being raised by your real father, but being pretty much raised by my mother, who was domineering and constantly chatting about everything. Everything just poured out of her mouth, good and bad. And I think I modeled that for a long time. I would try to talk to guys, talk about feelings and stuff, and that you just sort of feel them leaning back and then slowly leaving the room. But I had two daughters. I helped my second wife raise her two daughters. So I had like 20 years of raising girls, and they like to talk. Especially my daughters. They're very chatty like me, and my ex-wife was chatty also. She was an actress.
But you were also an introvert, because you like to pursue these diminishing returns and dive into things to the exclusion of everything else. You just dove in.
Right.
And so that's an unusual combination.
I guess so. You know, I've come more to understand it as I've gotten older. I don't know how you deal with that, because we've talked about it.
I'm told that people who are introverts but decided they wanted to get along with the rest of the human race sometimes teach themselves how to be extroverts. So I'm an introvert who gets his batteries recharged by doing individual things, but I like people too. So it seems like we both kind of started out with introvert orientation, but then we somehow became social. I think it would be harder for an extroverted social person to do introvert stuff, like spending a lot of time in the studio perfecting something.
Interesting thesis. I don't know. Hadn't really thought about that. Could be right.
So did you spend a lot of time in the darkroom?
I spent a lot of time sniffing glue in my room building model airplanes from my whole adolescence and teenage years, building models and having girlfriends, but I was a combination of almost brash and really insecure, very self-conscious, you know.
They go together. It kind of goes together.
Yeah.
So
I kind of hid out from
two more attributes. I think you're a self-taught person. You pick things up very easily. So you were not like academically that oriented, it seems like you described. And also it seems like the things that had meaning for you were not primarily driven by money. They were driven by other stuff. And so you created a lot of meaning. You had a very exciting, sounds like a charmed life.
In some ways, yeah.
Not by following any of the rules at all. Not by doing what probably people told you that you should do, if you even noticed what they told you. You probably didn't even listen.
Well, I tried, you know. I tried marching in a straight line and racking my chin back and stuff for 2 years and doing what everybody else was doing. And it was such a terrible fit that without being conscious about it, like, your perspective is really astute and way beyond my intellectual capacity to discern. I've had therapy and this and that as I learned to understand it, growing, you know, getting older. But I really, for a while, just wanted to fit in. I never felt like I did. It's like an Enneagram 4, you know.
That's a really kind of good place to stop. I wanted to fit in and didn't. I think that's true of all of the creative outliers in the world. We were never actually doing the things that people wanted us to do. We had other fish to fry. And I think, Jim, you are such a perfect example of a creative outlier. You've had many different lives, all of which were creative.
Yeah.
And sometimes they overlapped, and sometimes they interrupted each other, and sometimes you came back to the ones that got interrupted. You had this multidimensional threading of all of these same instruments and interests. So thanks for showing up, Jim.
You're welcome.
I found out even more about, I already thought you were fascinating before this, but now even more fascinating.
Thanks, Howard. My head is expanding by the moment.
So,
yeah, thanks very much.
so this is our first guest for today, and wow, I think we need to take a break. So, for the Meaning Place second episode of Harvesting Infinity, we're now to the third segment, which is called Composer's Corner. And we have here Robert O'Connor, who I met several years ago at Juilliard, who was a composer and a filmmaker, and also trained in engineering, and right now working on paintings for an exhibit too. So he definitely fits this whole category of the creative outlier, which are my favorite people in the world. And we're going to have a conversation. So I know that Robert has created a lot of meaning in his life through all of these different things, and I'm not even sure where to start. But how about starting with cultures? You're in a bunch of different innovation cultures. You're part of an art gallery, and you're still studying at Juilliard, and you're painting. So tell me a little bit about this kind of connection you have between some of these different cultures, including now you're doing piping, like on bagpipes, Scottish pipes, not
Irish pipes.
Irish pipes.
Yeah.
So how about starting with the difference between the Irish piping community and the classical composition piano playing community?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started learning piano when I was a kid, and I learned classical music, and came up through that whole classically trained Western tradition. And I was never very comfortable with performing. I always get a lot of anxiety about it and having to be perfect and follow the notes really carefully. And then a couple of years ago, my dad was getting older, and he was a very proud Irishman and loved Irish music. And my sister and I started playing Irish music for him, and I picked up the tin whistle, which is pretty easy to learn, and my sister plays the bodhrán, which is the traditional hand drum. And I fell in love with the sound of the Irish bagpipes, which are mellower than the Scottish Highland pipes. And they sit on your lap, and you have to sit down when you play them. And so I started taking lessons, and I went to this Piper's weekend called a Chnol last October. And it's a very different approach to making music. It's community oriented, and it's very deeply rooted in Irish culture. So it's an oral tradition. You don't need to read music in order to participate, and some of the greatest players don't read music. And so the tunes are passed down by ear, and so you'll have 12 different versions of the same tune, and they all have a slightly different name, and and the really devotees of the pipes and Irish music, they'll know which song came from which piper and what year. And the one thing I did really love was that I'm new to the pipes, and I'm not very good at them yet, and there's no judgment. In fact, I think there's this sort of welcoming of newcomers, and they want to spread the gospel of the uilleann pipes and Irish music. So they're like, come and we'll play at your speed. We'll work around you. And there's there's just this different kind of approach that I found just completely refreshing and really lovely. And yeah, so I've been taking a deep dive into that for the past year.
Not like Juilliard, where
Yeah.
if you were to make a mistake, oh my God.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, it's kind of it's funny. I do love the counterpoint and the classical way of writing, and it's like a puzzle to me, and I love it. And I love finding all those beautiful moments in writing like that. But in terms of performing, I don't like to perform that kind of music. I like to write it and listen to people perform my writing, but so it's kind of funny. But yeah.
You didn't even you have performed recently on the piano though, even though you don't normally perform that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have, and I've been getting a little more adventurous and overcoming my anxiety about that. As we attend this studio meetup in Manhattan once a month, if we make it every month, at Ray Lustig's studio, and he's a Juilliard teacher, and there are some really heavy hitters that come to his open studio. So to perform in front of them is pretty, intimidating sometimes. So, but Ray is just a wonderful, open person, and he doesn't care, So I've been trying to brush off that anxiety as much as I can. And
I think you were incredibly courageous because that's a scary group to play in front of. I have been scared myself playing in front of them. And
yeah.
as you say, Ray has been such a generous professor. We both met in a composition class of his several years ago.
We did.
And so talk a little bit about some of the impact. You've said that some teachers have had a lot of impact on you musically, that when you were even in high school, that you had an unusually musical high school with, I think you said it had a marching band and 2 orchestras and 3 choirs. So tell me a little bit about some of these other kinds of music people that had a big impact on you.
Yeah, so I was pretty lucky as a kid. My parents got a piano when I was 7 or 8, and I was interested in playing, and so they got me lessons, and then my high school, about half the high school out of 600 was in the music department, which is, I don't know if that's happens today. We were just very lucky, and I didn't know any difference. I just thought it was the way it was. And so I was in choir, I was in band, I was in orchestra, and I was in, we had a musical theater performance once a year, and we did that. We did concerts, and one thing they offered was music theory. And we studied from a book by Walter Piston called Harmony. And I didn't know at the time, but he was like, a very respected music theorist. And so I got that education early on, and I am so grateful because reading and writing music, it's just like any other language. If you learn it when you're young, it becomes this fluency that is so you don't think about it, So I can quickly read and write. So I'm very grateful for that. There's no delay. Yeah. And so I'm very grateful for that because I don't spend a lot of time on that, which I know some people do struggle with. So, yeah.
You said some of the pieces that were played through the schools were super dramatic and crazy. You mentioned the Poulenc opera where the nuns got their heads chopped off.
Yeah, we had our music theory teacher. He wanted to keep us entertained as well as educated. So he would pull out some funny, like crazy pieces of music because he wanted to show us that classical music wasn't this dead thing in a museum somewhere, that it could be dramatic. And so he played us, I forget the name of the opera by Poulenc. It'll come to me. Anyway, it's about these nuns, and they are resisting, and at the end they get their heads chopped off. And there's a screen, at least the version we saw. There was a screen, and you see the shadows of the nuns and the guillotine, whack, and in the music you hear just whack. And so we were all like kind of horrified as teenagers, but like also like, oh my God, this is wild. And he took us to see The Rise and Fall of the City of Mahagoni at the Met, which is a Kurt Weill opera. And so I feel very lucky. His name was Michael Bernard, and he was our choir teacher, our music theory teacher, and he really made learning music very exciting and enriched. You know, it was such an enriching experience. Yeah.
So besides this whole cultural thing and community thing and social thing, you also said some of it had to do with kind of honoring your roots with the piping and getting
Yes.
closer to your father and your sister.
Yeah.
This is a
I
lot
touched
of
on that. Yeah.
this is a
I
lot
touched
of
on that. Yeah. Go ahead.
there's a lot of different dimensions of music: honor, community, connection. So, and undoubtedly, music has a profound impact on you, as sound does. And you must have noticed this a long time ago. I'm sure you've been able to listen to the same pieces over and over and over again, but yet we don't like to watch the same movies over and over and over again and read the same books over and over and over again. So
That's true.
what do you think about that? What's going on there?
I do think, unlike painting, which you see one of my paintings here, painting, even abstract painting, their brains try to find some relationship to the real world. You know, like they're looking for an image. And I think with music, that is just not there. It's this very primal experience of absorbing the sound and reacting to it emotionally. At least good music that does that to me, you know. So I think there's more of a directness from music. Like it gets deep inside us very quickly. And so I'm with you. If I hook into a song and it stirs something in me, I can listen to it over and over and over again. And I'm sure most people feel that way. And of course it gets connected to experiences. If we hear something when we're a teenager or a child, and you know there's some memory associated with it, all of that's connected, you know. And just like my father with the Irish music and so forth. So yeah, I think it's pretty powerful.
So we've been talking about a lot of different musical dimensions, but you have a lot of other artistic dimensions besides the music. There's the painting over your left shoulder, and you make videos and films and soundtracks. So what else besides, I know right now you're in a painterly phase because you have an exhibition coming up in a gallery.
Yeah.
So how's this shift between, you know, this real-time get into your head immediately music thing and some of these other fields? Is it like a different speed of immersion or shifting gears? Or
I guess it's shifting gears a little bit, but I do really feel like it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of this creative practice that I've built up, and however chaotic and crazy it may seem. So I think my paintings relate to my video, relates to my music, and I really think at Juilliard I kind of discovered that because I thought they were separate. And through the experience of writing music, and then I took a scoring to film class, and I began responding to images with sound, and I got involved in a couple scoring projects, and then I make my own videos, and it's just all tied together now, and it feels really like I've arrived there. took me almost 60 years to do that, but it feels like one thing. And so, yes, I'm working on a painting, but this morning I was practicing my pipes, and I have an assignment due for class next week. So I'm working on that too. So it's all happening at the same time.
So you want to show us some examples of some of this visual stuff, or play us some examples of the sound stuff, or what would you like to show us?
I'll show you some visuals, and then I can show you a quick little music video. Let's see. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is my website. It's just robertsartandmusic.com. So this is a music video here called Burning Cathedrals, which I did in Ray's class, actually. And I was lucky enough to get it into the Cannes Short Film Festival last year. We could look at that. And then I created this audio using my digital audio workstation that I'm pretty proud of. So those are two. That's a video music project and a music project.
So could you blow that up? Could you show us a little bit of that?
Sure. Let's see. Here's Burning Cathedrals.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've seen parts of this. I don't know if I saw this entire version, but
Yeah.
that's really cool. And it's wonderful that for you to create in these different genres, that you're moving between them so easily, between painting and composing and playing and pipes and piano. That's, I think, yep, this qualifies you as a serious creative outlier. No question about it.
I feel like it.
You've kind of got to live
In a good way, in a good way. So,
Yeah. You know, I don't think there's that much that we could say to follow up that video. That was really great. I know you might tell people what your Vimeo channel is. You've got both a website with your art music, and you've also got a video channel. So I
yeah,
guess
it's just Robert O'Connor on, let me see here. Yeah, yeah, just Robert O'Connor. There's my mug. And I have a library. I actually don't have that many things on here. This is a birthday video for my daughter. This is a project I did with Ray Lustig. This is Ray's music, but we worked on a video project together. That was a lot of fun. I did a scoring project for the Kyotography. I never can say it correctly. The Kyoto International Film Festival. And I was asked to score this project called 10-10-10. So they had 10 photographers, videographers from all around the world, and they made a montage. Excuse me. And I scored the montage, and that was really wonderful. It was done all on my digital audio workstation and with some instruments I had in the studio. So that was a great experience.
wow.
And yeah.
You know, we have many more conversations we could have, but I think we've come kind of the end of this segment.
Sure.
But this is really great stuff, and it makes me really appreciate why I like talking to you so much. I learn so much all of the time. You know, besides all of the artistic expression, you also have this giant pile of technical chops to know about the filmmaking and how to use Photoshop and how to use Final Cut Pro and how to use Logic and how to use Dorico and Sibelius. So you've taught yourself a whole pile of different platforms, which, you know, each one of these programs has a 1,000-page manual. So
It's
you
true.
learn how to use a half a dozen of these things. This could take a lifetime. So
You can, and I feel like sometimes I only learn what I need, you know, to do what I want. So I think being a multidisciplinary artist like this, sometimes I feel like I'm not able to go as deeply into one thing, but I think having this wider net that I use to create opens up a lot of other possibilities to me. So, you know, and if I get stuck or I need more professional help, then, you know, I'll go seek it somewhere.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot for spending this time. And I look forward
My
to
pleasure.
seeing you in Manhattan at Studio Night at Ray's.
You got it.
It's probably in about 2 weeks, I think. And wow, it's very inspiring. This is really cool stuff. I'm totally enjoying it. I never get tired of this. So that kind of wraps up our Harvesting Infinity for today. As you see, Robert can have a show of his own and many shows of his own. And maybe we'll do more later. But even without the show, I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, see you in a couple weeks.
So
good talking to you.
Thanks, Robert.
All right, take care.
Take care.